with just a little recap of what our agency does and where we've been and where we're headed. First, as a reminder, in 2016, you all agreed to, or Mississippi agreed to separate the Division of Child Protection Services from the greater umbrella of the Department of Human Services. That was a recommendation made by the monitors in the Olivia Y lawsuit. And as a reminder, the lawsuit was filed in 2004. Some people think of it as a federal lawsuit from DOJ. It actually is not. It was filed by plaintiff's attorneys from a nonprofit advocacy group for children. There are approximately 25 states across the nation right now that are under similar lawsuits, generally over how children are treated in foster care, whether or not states have adequate staffing for the number of children they're called to take care of. And, you know, when Mississippi was originally sued in 2004, we had caseworkers carrying upwards of, or at least rumor has it, of 200 kids on their caseload. That's a dangerously high caseload. The state settled in 2008 for the first time. So the lawsuit, it claims that we weren't meeting constitutional requirements for children who are in the custody of the state, but that was never litigated. The state agreed originally to a settlement agreement that had over 150 requirements and metrics that are very detailed. It gets into the, you know, how many visits a worker makes per child in certain situations. The lawsuit has morphed over those last 16 years. Exactly every 4 years, the state has renegotiated and settled again. Arguably for a worse agreement each time, a different agreement, but still nonetheless an onerous, burdensome, micro level agreement that, in my opinion, can never be met. The states agreed to over 60 metrics that would be met at 100% perfection for 2 years straight. That is simply not possible. There is no state agency that can be 100% perfect at anything. And I would argue if they do, then they're either cutting corners or they're manipulating their data. So, yes, sir.
Who's negotiating on our behalf?
Right now?
Well, yes. I mean, if you're saying we're negotiating with the feds and we're getting a stick every time, it works.
Different lawyer, it's unclear who negotiated. Nobody will actually claim the first agreement. You know, I can kind of peel back who was around at that time, but lawyers generally have been in a room with the plaintiffs, attorneys, and not with clinicians, and come out with what they thought was a better arrangement than taking the case to trial. I am both a lawyer and a clinician, and we've been represented by Baker Donaldson for the last 6 years, I think, in this suit at least. So with the help of our counsel at Baker Donaldson, I began in 2021, right after I got in this position. I started talking to the plaintiffs and the monitors. In 2016, the court appointed new monitors for the state, and I believe that's been a very positive thing. One of the monitors formerly ran the child welfare agency in New Jersey, and the other was general counsel for that agency. So they're kind of a clinician legal duo themselves. What I knew we needed immediately when got into this role was time and space and relief from I had 40 people churning out data that nobody was looking at every quarter. So it wasn't changing how the agency operated, and it wasn't changing things for children. So we did negotiate a stay in the lawsuit. We called it a rebuilding period originally. Based on progress, sometimes incremental, sometimes bigger than others, we've been able to continuously negotiate some additional time. We have 4 primary metrics that we're focusing on. The most important one is caseloads, and that is the nut that Mississippi's never cracked. And to be honest, most states don't. Child welfare is extremely difficult, traumatic work. We run a 24/7 first responder agency. So calls come in at 2 a.m. If 12 calls come in and I have one person on call, we got to figure it out. There's no, we can't create a waiting list. We can't, put a stack of papers on our desk and wait until Monday morning to deal with it. These are children, and they are in very precarious situations. Our staff go into really dangerous situations, sometimes without backup. They drive their own cars. So it's a unique agency, and failing to respond is really not an option. So the caseloads, and I agree with this, caseloads matter. If I give the best social worker in the state 50 cases, he or she is going to fail at some point. It's not doable. So it's kind of fundamental to practice. Until we get enough workers where the children are, we're not going to be very good at our jobs. You can see on this really bright, busy page here that since I've been in this position since 2020, we've gotten caseloads from somewhere around, when we came in, they were at in the 50s. They dropped back down to the 40s. We came in during the pandemic, so there were a lot of factors going on, but we saw a real dip in caseload compliance that followed the 8 months of the pandemic where the agency just quit hiring. And so a couple of other unique things about the agency are that our caseworkers who work directly with children and families have to have 8 weeks of prescribed training before they can even take any cases. And then we phase them in so that they take a small caseload in the beginning and build on that. So they have a full caseload by 5 months. A caseload, a manageable caseload is somewhere between 14 and 19 kids generally. The lawsuit mandates 14-1 in most types of cases, 15-1 in a few. And then, so it's very specific, and it's very conservative about how many cases a caseworker can carry. All that to say, we have gotten the agency to an all-time high of 72% of caseloads met. We're shooting for 90%. And additionally, during that time, not only did we focus on meeting the lawsuit requirements, but we also focused on what I consider dangerously high caseloads. We had some workers carrying 3 times a caseload, 4 times a caseload. We started with those, and we started backing our way down. So while that doesn't necessarily, good morning, Jim, does not necessarily get us to the 90% compliance, it gets us out of serious danger zone. And we are now, after a year of really focusing on those dangerously high caseloads, We have only 3 workers who are over a 2 times caseload. One may have come down yesterday. We watched this. We've got data that gives us real-time information. And so then, we'll start working on those that are between 1.0 and 2.0. And it will have the long-term effect of more stably keeping all of our caseloads within a safe place. So, a little more background. Sometime around 2016, you all also funded replacement of a 20-plus-year-old legacy system that's just the bane of my existence. We can't change things about practice because you can't code it into MacWS. So we took the money that you had appropriated $15 million. Like I said, some years ago, that kept rolling over, and the project really just never got started. It is complicated and difficult to procure technology in Mississippi, and it's also complicated and difficult to build technology. So we are about 8 months out from having our project finished. We procured it. We are working with a vendor, and my staff have spent countless additional hours to doing their clinical jobs, helping design the system so that it works for hopefully another 20, 25 years for Mississippi kids.
So you think the September date's a solid date?
As solid as this kind of thing can be, there are a couple of risks still pending in the project that we're keeping an eye on. We took the opportunity while we're building this technology to also simultaneously modernize our banking practices. The agency had been, in order to meet needs across the state of children in various counties, the agency was using just a pen and paper process. We were writing paper checks to buy children shoes when they needed them. Well, that took 8 weeks at least, because the check had, the approval had to go from us to DHS to DFA back to us. And then we were writing a paper check. And furthermore, Walmart doesn't want to take more than 2 checks from us in a day. So it was just, it's maddening. We're working with Regions Bank, setting up these accounts that have traditionally been in various banks all across the state, county specific funds. So a few counties still give money to kids, not many, but we'll track those the same way any modern corporation tracks multiple accounts. And we'll use debit cards for that. So that's got to be tied into the CWIS system we're building. And that's the unknown really right now. That's the highest risk. We're also building it's called a structured decision-making model, and it is designed to help guide decisions and questions on the front end of cases when they come in through the hotline. The person who answers the call there is a trained clinician, but they would have a lot more guidance from this technology system. It's like a decision tree basically, and uses data from across the country, from other child welfare agencies, builds in the state-specific statutes, and also norms it for culturally the trends that we've seen in the past here in Mississippi. So what it will do is allow us to be a little more surgical or specific about what we do with cases from the moment they come into the hotline. And then we'll also build out the same sort of system for investigations so that we have more consistency across the state in how we treat the cases from the outset. That will also hopefully give us, we know that in Mississippi, we get about 34,000 calls a year. That's escalated really at about 1,000 additional calls each year since I've been in this role. But we know that we screen in about 75% of those calls. So it means that we have to investigate them. And nationally, the average is somewhere around 50%. So we're very, very likely over screening in. And because there's no consistent standard being applied, I have concerns that we're not necessarily screening in the right cases. There's a lot of, there's variance in how that works right now. Courts have a really strong influence on what we end up investigating. So that's part of the workload volume. And it's, I don't have a lot of control over it, but that's a place where we can bring in some modern practices that are based on data and evidence, and create some consistency. So all that to say, that's the work that's going on right now.
I noticed, you've done a great job of retention. I think last year we talked about
Yes, sir. Thank you for reminding me. We worked with SPB last year in their SE Squared project and took advantage of the opportunity to really restructure. We had all kinds of pins being used for, like every agency, you just took what pin you could get and created the position you needed. We built out a 9-rung career ladder with SPB. It's for social services, and it clearly, we got the bottom rung salary up, not to market rate, but to closer to market rate. And then from there, we built out 9 rungs above that. There's opportunity within those rungs to incentivize people getting a license, getting their master's degree. It's really focused on trying to build not only a workforce full of bodies, but a workforce full of well-trained and well-prepared clinicians. It's designed to keep people in the system if we want them to stay, and to streamline we reduced some layers of management in the clinical structure when we did this. So that was one measure we took. We also created an internal response team, a workforce wellness team that focuses on building morale and responding when we have a death of a baby or a bad incident, which happens pretty regularly, not deaths, but bad incidents. There's a lot of secondary trauma that goes along with that. And when we throw people right back in and expect them to go to court the next day and then continue with their caseload of 30 cases, we see people start to really shut down. And we were seeing a lot of FMLA. So the goal is to get the agency staffed to the level that people can actually take the leave they accrue occasionally, and can, supervisors can use that as a tool. Sometimes they really need to take a week off and go see a therapist, because the stuff that we see and come into first as the first responder, some of it's horrific. I don't like to sensationalize the work, but it's, a baby with its head bashed in, toddlers who've been beaten. So all of that has resulted in, the other thing is focusing on getting those dangerously high caseloads down. People who have choices and have, my best social workers, they're not going to stick around for that forever. There's easier ways for them to make money, and there's easier ways for them to make more money. So that's a big part of retention as well. We've brought our turnover rate down from, it was hovering somewhere close to 35 before we got here. It got worse. And now we've got it down to about, the lowest we've had it is right at 20%. We're back up to about 22% right now. And that's huge because nationally, the average is somewhere around 28 to 30%. When you have a third of your agency churning like that, you end up with, I mean, kids have a different workers in some places every month. That is not good for consistent care delivery. So by reducing turnover and really focusing on hiring, recruiting intentionally at schools of social work and numerous other degrees that are allowed for frontline caseworkers, we've been able to hire more. We've worked with SPV to streamline the hiring process. It can be often very lengthy in the state, and we know that when we have someone who is qualified and someone we really want in these roles, if it takes 8 to 12 weeks to hire them, they've got another option by then. They're gone. So we focused on reducing the time it takes to get employees hired, and then we built out. Is the map thing on here? Yeah. Top left. We're in the second semester really of a program, a workforce development program we built with 8 of the institutions of higher learning that have social work programs. And it's actually, they're self-governing. They've formulated an internal governance group. We draw down $40 with state funds they were already spending. They use those state funds. We draw down the match with them, but they use them to give scholarships to students. They choose the top students in their programs. They give scholarships to students who do internships for us in the last semester of their program. We recognized 3 years ago that the people who stayed with the agency the longest, and sometimes as a lifetime career, came in as interns. So they had 6 months to really ease into the work rather than coming right into a caseload. And so this program intentionally recruits interns, incentivizes them to take the internship, then incentivizes them to stay with the agency. They have to stay with the agency for a year in order not to have to pay back that scholarship for it's last semester for bachelor's degree and last year for master's degree. We have 34 students who are in one of those scholarships right now. And because of the intentionality around the internship program, we have over 80 students who are in internships with us, not all scholarship, but those will be coming out in May. And because of the intentional workforce development initiatives we've taken, we are getting now to where we have months with big spikes in hiring. And so that's one thing that, we've struggled with on figuring out how to project for that, because I need to hire those people when they're available. I've worked with Kelly Hardwick and Ryan over at SPB, and I think we have a good handle on how to do that in the future. So all that to say, I think we've been good stewards of the money you've given us in the past. You've been very, very supportive, and we're almost finished, I guess you would say, with splitting completely from DHS. We had split a lot of functions between 2016 and this past year. There were still fiscal functions being carried out at DHS on our behalf. So budgets and accounting, paying of invoices, payroll, and then the back end of our legacy MacWis system is in the environment at DHS still, and it can't be moved because it's such a clunky old thing. It'd be more time consuming and costly than it's worth. So there's still some functions that we have to pay them for. We've pulled most of those in-house. that was a big surge this past year. It wasn't necessarily new money. It was money that was being spent at DHS. We were paying for it. We paid them for the services they provided. And we've pulled those services in-house. By and large, it's been one FTE that sat over at DHS is now at CPS. And in fact, we hired a lot of the same people who were already doing our work over there. We have a few positions that we still need to fill in budgets and accounting, and most importantly, in eligibility. This federal funding stream, I showed y'all last year at the Senate hearing, I believe, probably my budget hearing and also the Senate hearing on children and families. Our funding comes down in, I think it's over a dozen different separate funding streams that are under 4E. It's SSBG, Social Security Block Grant. 4E is our portion of that. And then under 4E, you get a little bucket over here for prevention, another bucket for teenage youth. So it's kind of complicated. They're all matched at different rates. But the most important thing for maximizing the federal dollars that we get is determining eligibility for the children that we serve, which I find ridiculous. I think that of all children who are abused should not be, whether they get help or not, should not be dependent on their parents' income, but it is. I did not make the rules up, but I knew that Mississippi could do a lot better than it was doing. We were hovering around 28% of our kids being eligible. We doubled down with a consultant 2.5, 3 years ago. Bridget's become our internal expert. And, we knew we could do better in Mississippi because our neighboring states around us who have similar demographics and poverty thresholds set in their TANF plans, which is what all this is based on. Arkansas enjoys a 60% eligibility rate. Well, every percentage point we go up in Mississippi equates to about $850,000. So last year we went from, over the last 2.5 years, we've gone from 28% of our kids being determined eligible to 42%. That resulted in an increase last year in $10 million in federal dollars that didn't require additional money to draw down. It was a matter of our team really focusing and learning. There are a lot of tricks to doing this. I'm hesitant to use the word tricks, but it's a little like the tax code. If you redetermine when a kid's at TPR, then you don't count their parents' income anymore and you put them back into the formula. So when they go on to adoption, that's a whole nother opportunity to really increase the penetration rate for the state. So we've been very successful with that. We do need additional eligibility workers. We've lost 3 in the last 4 months and not been able to replace them. So on to this year's request. We're asking for a general fund increase of $9,520,586, which would be a total request of 147,58, 147. The additional federal spending authority there takes into account an expectation that we'll continue to increase what we draw down federally. We actually last year brought in with the 10 million from eligibility determinations and an additional 10 million from I don't even know how to explain it. We filed a separate, when we separated from DHS, we were able to file a specific cost allocation plan, which is a formula for how you draw down and spend your federal funding. And it's increasing every month that it runs. We've run it twice now. You run it quarterly, and we're seeing a gradual increase in the federal ratio it brings into the state. These people can answer more technical questions about that if you're interested. It is like Greek to me. That being said, we're also we're actually about to submit this week a final iteration of what's called the Family First Prevention Services Act plan for the state. This is something that the state had the opportunity to elect to opt into starting in 2016. The conventional wisdom here was that the funding stream was not, it didn't bring in enough extra money to make it worth the effort. It is a complex arm of 4E funding, but it will be matched. It's an uncapped amount of funding to help families, to help prevent removing children or help get children back into their families quicker. It's a fundamental part of the services we can provide, are a big part of really, sustaining a culture of life. It allows us to take care of children in a way that in the past we would have had to bring them into custody just to provide those services, which then creates a burden on an already, a limited resource and is bad for kids. So we're excited about this funding stream. It will, by 2027, it will be matched at the state's FMAP, which is one of the better things about being the poorest state or being at the bottom of the list. So right now we're paying for some of the services with ARPA funds that you all have given us. And so we're building out capacity for the services that we'll start providing under that FFPSA plan. Our ARPA funding runs out in 2026. And in 2027, the FFPSA will go to that FMAP match. So we'll be able to draw down roughly 75% to 25% state funds. All that to say, our federal spending authority is a little bit of a crapshoot. We are not sure how much that, particularly the FFPSA, will bring in. The good thing is we have another year to gather data before we really, will start tapping that funding stream. I've talked to you about Olivia Y and why the caseloads are so important. The next phase in trying to continue decreasing turnover and increasing the percentage of caseloads met, we have eight counties that we've identified that have chronically and consistent, very high turnover rates and end up with extremely low staffing ratios. And so, regardless of whether we're at 72% across the state, people are just dying in the trenches in those counties. So we have worked with SPB to take what they had as a type duty location pay model that really wasn't going to serve us well, because you couldn't turn it off for the employee when they left the location. That was the important thing for us, is that we pay more for them to go into these counties nobody wants to stay in. And then if they want to leave that county, that's great. We have lots of places we need them, but they leave the pay there. So the incentive is just to try to staff those counties to a safe level. I feel like I've covered a good bit of this. Yes, sir.
Looks like you got 23, 600, 270.
I think because we had a backload of adoptions, a backlog that they'd been sitting in the parents' rights had been terminated, and then they'd been sitting in the adoption lane for a long time. The legal party in interest at the adoption phase is the family that is adopting the child. So the agency had been taking a fairly passive role in what happened with the case after that, and we took a much more active role. We can use federal funds to reimburse attorneys a reasonable flat rate. We started doing that, and we started managing it with our internal legal office, a docket basically of those kids. And if the family had an attorney they wanted to use, that's fine. But we managed, if the case sits for more than 60 days, we're calling that attorney. And we've taken some cases back from attorneys who just they've let the case go stale. And so we have the same number of kids coming through. I think they're just not getting stuck at that phase. So we had a large number we needed to reduce back then.
I know in the past, criticism. Good to see that been some caught up.
Yes, sir. I call that it's a little bit of a hammer and chisel approach. If you remember last year, I demonstrated what we had learned by tracking the process of a child from front door of the agency to the back door. And that is that legally they have to travel through 3 separate causes of action. And there are 3 separate parties that drive that cause of action, 3 different legal burdens of proof. And so it's a wonder kids get through the system, to be honest. There's a lot of push for either some reform or uniformity to the youth courts, or you all listened and made us a party last year to the case. We hold legal and physical custody of the child. We're responsible for being good stewards of the money you give us and the feds give us, and spending it according to rules and restrictions. And yet we were not even a party. We weren't considered a party in court. So we had no control over how long children stayed with us. We still don't have a lot. And it's not a consistent process, but it's better than it was.
One you mentioned in your big difference. What is
Yes, Chairman Hobson, it was the addition of on-call and callback pay that we wish to institute in this coming year. The state portion of that makes up that difference. Our initial request was for 8.6 million. And from last August, when we submitted it, and now 9.5 that's what that difference is.
Guess we're just make sure that Senator Blackwell and Corbin have that difference, because it's not on my worksheet. And second question, I know we got a lot of other stuff to do, but I am curious about the number and the percentage you told us of the number of investigations. And I want to make sure I understood it. You do 34,000 investigations right now. And let me just tell you some things I heard, and then you correct me. 34,000. I think you said something about 75% of those that you're investigating. Maybe you don't need to do that many. Maybe there's some things that you discover that would save us some money or save you some money on the back end. But what is what's the national norm on that? And Are there things that what can you do to not have to spend that money, but make sure that you're covering the situation and know that there's not a dangerous situation out there?
Several
Kind of a
things.
lot of stuff in there, but I'm just trying
Well,
to compare it to other states.
That's a
And
great question
where do we
because
rank and what are we doing right and wrong there?
right, nationally, the average is about 50% of calls are screened in. We are implementing a technology solution that will, I think you walked in when we were talking about this, but create more consistency on what we screen in and why, and then what we do with those cases on investigation. Additionally, I think there's room for some reform in our mandatory reporting laws in Mississippi. We have basically over the years morphed into literally every person is considered a mandatory reporter. There's a penalty if you don't report. So there's kind of a shotgun approach. If you hear something, say something, or if you see something, say something. And that's not even safe for kids. When we divert limited resources to chasing down kids with lice, we're missing the kid in the closet, possibly. So roughly 10% of the calls that come in for us are these really bad felonious child abuse cases. And those are the ones that we've got to really be able to use our resources to focus on those kids and on preventing, unnecessary removals. CPS has really become kind of the last resort default for kids for any and all problems. And the truth is, if the state systems don't adequately address healthcare, mental health care, poverty, we can't fix it ourselves. Our budget doesn't even begin to contemplate that. The other thing is that this technology that we're bringing in on the front end, excuse me, as part of that Family First Prevention Services Act I mentioned. And we will be building into that technology the ability to give what we're calling a community response, but it's basically an alternative to investigation. So if a call comes in and it has some concerns, right now our only solution is to investigate. There are a number of cases where on the face of the call, the issue is really more about, it might be about lack of running water and electricity in the house. So two things we'll be doing on that front end is providing actual services that can go in and try to remedy that issue. They're still mandatory reporters. So if the situation decompensates and the child is at risk, they would refer that right back to us. And the other thing that we're doing that I think is really exciting is we've brought it's a nonprofit group that has built a technology solution to link resources in the community with the Child Welfare Agency. And it's called Care Portal. We will be investing in the technology. Actually, this year it won't cost the state anything, but Care Portal likes to partner with a local nonprofit. Lifeline has agreed to be that local partner, and the agency it's a public, private, faith-based partnership. We, along with Lifeline, will recruit nonprofits, churches who are willing to be basically on call. They agree to monitor this technology system. They also define what they're really good at and what they want to do. But we can put a need in, a referral in. So, we've got a grandmother who would take her 3 grandchildren, but one of them's in a wheelchair. She doesn't have a ramp. So we can put the need into the Care Portal. It's in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And the churches in that area, or even over here in Hinds County, some churches want to give money. Some churches have a team of mission-minded carpenters. And it's up and running really well in Oklahoma. And we're actually going to have a demo this week of the product, and we're rolling out this in the Tri-County area right now. So that's a way that we will leverage those relationships. It will give the community more awareness of what we do. And it will also give, I mean, we have very generous people in Mississippi who want to help. And, you know, they think that fostering is the only way to help us. It is, there's so many ways to help these kids. And so this is going to be another resource on that front end of the case that very possibly can keep the child from ever coming into state custody.
Just two quick follow-ups, Mr. Chairman. What can we do? And this is a loaded question, so you may have to think about it and get back with me. But well, first, is everything, our statutes have all changed to CPS from DHS, have they not?
Most of it, we
don't have
tried to
anything
clean
hanging
up.
out there that we need to clean up, do we, that you know of?
We're finding still a little bit of cleanup in places that statutes referenced us. There were some things we didn't want to open last year, but most of it
Take a
has.
look at that and let us know. And then the
Okay.
second thing is, what can we do in the statutes to help with the situation you brought up at first? And again, a loaded question, you can get back with me later on it, but I know I agree that there are probably a lot of people that aren't sure, and they feel like, you know, I don't want to be liable.
Right.
I don't want to be arrested, so I'm going to report this anyway. Just to have, you know, keep you from investigating things that don't, I don't know where the fine line is, but if you've got suggestions after you're in the trenches, you and your team are in the trenches, and I'd love to know, are there places where you see that we could help remove that requirement or change it in a way to free you up to do the things you need to be doing instead of wasting time because, you know, Johnny fell down at the playground and somebody thinks that he's maybe being abused. And also something we faced up here is when people make false accusations, how do you quickly ferret, you know, get that out and get rid of it? And maybe there's a back end issue too on that whether we should do more towards the people that are making ridiculous allegations. I don't want people to feel like they can't get to you because they're afraid that if they report it and the child is not being abused, you know what it is. So please get with us and this subcommittee. Yeah, because I'd like to help in that regard. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thought we actually addressed some of those because we had one of our colleagues had some claims.
The hotline gets weaponized. It's reporting. It can be anonymous, and you know, it's structured in a way that is so broad that it sort of begs to be weaponized. And that's I think having a more clear penalty for bad faith reporting, and also considering, you know, there needs to be some accountability for who the person is and what they know, because arguably, first of all, they're our best witness. They're the person who's called and knows something about this child. So I do think that there are ways that we don't have to really encourage everyone to call about everything. What we do is really invasive to families. And, you know, to your point about your colleagues, I have friends who've been subjects of reports. Schools are really pretty zealous about this, some schools and some people in schools. And so, you know, these people had a path to me and could contact me, but I can't very well, once a report's made, you know, if something was going on in that household and something happened to the child, when I've taken special measers, you know, it creates a bad situation for the state. So
just get back with me.
We'll do.
We can't resolve it. You're not going to have time this morning.
Senator Norwood.
I have a few questions, and I probably will try to get with you later on, but just the separation. When the employees separate from the department, what's the predominant reason they would separate from the agency?
Workload is a really big reason, and nature of the work. We still have some people, who probably don't need to be in the role they're in. This work is niche work and it's not a fit for everybody.
What about is safety, that now?
In Hines County, I have people walking into situations that police don't want to go into, or, I have kids who are being put into state custody because no other facility in the state will take them. They've been blacklisted, if you will, from, locked mental health facilities. Can't get them into juvenile justice facilities. So the solution is to call CPS and put them in CPS's custody. That does not create a solution that doesn't otherwise exist. And it means one of my employees often ends up going to pick a child up that law enforcement won't transport in their own vehicle. We try to send two, but two of me is not necessarily going to be able to contain a 16-year-old.
And I don't want to drag it out. It's something that I do have an interest in. I'd like to maybe have some conversations, see if we can't facilitate some.
Thank you.
Because that, I do understand ambulances won't go into certain areas, and so I mean, I can understand what the challenge that some of the workers would have.
Thank you.
Now, in terms of preventive, approximately what percentage of the budget you think would be going into? Because it look like if we can stop bringing the children into custody, then it would help. That's I guess one of the greatest deterrent for the high caseload. How about what percentage of your budget are you putting into that?
Well, my goal with the ARPA funding that you all gave us is to be able to flip our focus so that we are putting more funding into prevention. But you have still got this pool of kids over here that I have to take care of immediately and that are really escalating, honestly. That is one graph I wanted to bring y'all's attention to, is the data over time of caseloads. You'll see at the end here over the last 8 months, since July of last year, June of last year, we've seen what's really an unprecedented uptick, a consistent upward trend of kids coming into custody. And we are back up to the highest level that number of children in custody was since I started this job. And that's despite efforts to prevent kids from coming into custody. Same trends happening across the country. So that's a little bit terrifying. I think we can do more, and we do have plans to do more over the next 2.5 years. But my goal would be, I don't have a percentage of our budget because I don't know what's going to happen with this group yet. But absolutely, replacing what we were spending with ARPA with FFPSA, that will require 25% state match. But the good thing about this funding stream is that we can tap other state funding and actually some private funding that's being spent for these purposes and certify it if it's not being otherwise matched. So I can work with funding that's being spent at Medicaid or Department of Health and draw down 4E funding for their maternal home visiting program if it's delivered to fidelity and it can meet the reporting requirements.
Well, I mean, I just want to be a resource to help where I can.
Thank you.
Please understand, I do not want your job. I admire and
Senator Norwood, if you would just
I admire you.
agree to take my job, I would write you a thank you note. I would send you flowers.
No. I appreciate the work that you've done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've got another group behind you. And if you would, would you copy me on what you send Senator Hobson?
Of course. Thank you all. We are, of course, available if you have other questions you might ask.
So everything that I put in this, send a breakdown?
Yes.
Breakdown of the funding split?
Shannon was in a picture with Governor's Ball.
Okay, yeah.
Is he doing well? Is he doing well?
I'm sorry. Workforce development, I didn't realize it wasn't on. I'm sorry. That's TANF and SNAP and our workforce development division. Now it's a little too close to me. There we go. In terms of staffing, the next slide here, we have currently 1,296 permanent full-time positions. We have 474 time limited positions allocated to us for a total of 1,770. And you'll see that we're asking for a significant increase, and I'll explain why momentarily, but we're asking for 1,309 permanent full-time positions. We're asking for 830 time limited positions for a total of 2,139 positions for state fiscal year 2025. And
Bob, what are the time limit positions?
those are programmatic positions that are predominantly, I guess, all of those are federally funded, 100% federally funded, most of them.
Predominantly.
Yeah. So we have some time limited positions in our childcare division. We have time limited divisions in where else? Maureen, I
We have
guess.
so many yet, economic
Yeah.
assistance, workforce development. And the APS part of it.
Right. Our adult protective service has some time limited positions and economic assistance. We use these primarily. I think most of them are really management positions. A good many of them are management level positions. They tend not to be, they're not state service, and that gives us a little more flexibility in the sense that they're non-state service. So in management, it gives us more discretion if we have, difficulties and we have to have make a.
What is time limited? Temporary position?
They are funded out of a specific grant for a specific period of time. That's where the time limited comes from. The grant. Right.
Use that same person for another time?
Well, usually we will be applying for grants all throughout the year. I'll give you a good example. Child care has a grant called the preschool development grant for birth to 5-year-olds. That is a 5-year grant. Last year we escalated, I don't know how many positions was it, Maureen, about 200 positions onto that grant. And those are time limited positions that all of the employees working on that grant are limited by the 5-year term of the grant. Now, if we get a new grant, at the end of that grant, we'll transition them over to the new grant. But if they are unable to get a new grant, then at the end of that 5-year grant, a good many of those positions will phase out, so to speak, and go away. So there is a graph here about what our positions have done over time. Just wanted to give you a sense of what has happened. Like everybody, every agency took a downturn during the pandemic, and we were not immune to that. We dropped at one point with our permanent positions down to about 1,300. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were at over 1,700 permanent positions. So we dropped almost 400 positions, and we begun to see a recovery there. Time limited is what has increased the most because we have gotten some other grants. We got some aging grants and we got some child care grants, and that has allowed our time limited positions to increase. But I will tell you that in the permanent full-time positions right now, we have about 1,158. We have 1,158 that are filled. We have about 138 of those that are vacant. In those time limited positions, we have 373 of those are currently filled, and 100 of the current allocation are vacant. And then for our total positions, we have about 1,530 filled and about 240 vacancies. the majority of the vacancies, the largest number of those vacancies are out in our county offices. And just to give a little more detail to the general fund increase and the reason we're asking for $20.8 million increase, you'll see almost $6.5 million of that is for county office employees. We maintain offices in all 82 counties, and actually in Sunflower, and I forget which other county, we have 2 county offices in 2 counties, Oliver. Okay. That is where we are hurting the most right now. We have a significant shortage of eligibility staff all across the state. We have some county offices that are operating with 1 or 2 employees who are maybe not allocated as any more than 6 or 7, but 6 or 7 person staff operating with 1 or 2 people, the caseload doesn't go down, and that's pretty heavy load for them. Harrison County, Hinds County, and DeSoto County are 3 of our largest counties. We did get a nice increase in salaries through a salary career ladder plan that we got approved through the State Personnel Board, and that is allowing us to bring eligibility staff on at a higher level. But we are still seeing a lot of attrition in our county office staff, and that's why we are really requesting about, we're asking for 356 additional headcount for those county offices, because that is where the rubber hits the road for us. For the largest part of our service delivery comes through the county offices, and so we need those positions filled. Youth services, we have youth services employees that operate the Oakley Youth Development Center, formerly known as the Oakley Training School. And then we have youth court staff in every county. If there's a youth court judge, they work directly with the youth court judge, and they're essentially assigned to his or her staff. If there's a youth court referee or chancellor who's handling the youth court docket, then our youth services counselor works directly with that referee or that chancellor. And just to give you an idea of what they do, our youth services counselors out in the youth courts are what we would think of in the adult criminal justice system as probation officers, basically. They do the preliminary counseling with students who come into the juvenile delinquent into the juvenile justice system, and then they do the aftercare when the child is adjudicated delinquent. If they're sentenced to community service or sent home, then they stay sort of on probation, so to speak, with our youth services counselors. Now, the Adolescent Opportunity Program goes hand in glove with that. We are mandated to operate it subject to funding. We don't have any funding. We haven't had any funding since 2017 for that program. And the logical question is, what happened in 2017? Well, what happened is the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said, oh, that TANF money you're using for juvenile justice, can't use TANF money for juvenile justice. No child who is adjudicated delinquent in the juvenile justice system we can't draw TANF money for those community-based programs. And what we did in years past for the Adolescent Opportunity Program, just to give you an idea of what we're trying to reinstate, we partnered with about 20 agencies, folks like the Department of Mental Health, and then a lot of nonprofit and other mental health agencies all across the state to provide counseling, intensive supervision, just community-based programs, so that a child, if he went through the juvenile justice system and was initially adjudicated delinquent, but the offense was not serious enough that he went to an Oakley, because there you don't get sentenced to Oakley unless the offense you committed would be a felony if you were an adult. But we need some community-based programs because we need that aftercare. And we simply have not been able to offer that in the last 6 going on 7 years.
So what do you think you need 9 million?
We asked, we did a survey of all of our youth courts, and we essentially added up all of what they thought it would cost to run a program in their specific county or district. And 9 million is the number we came up with. It's not an exact number, Mr. Chairman, because again, we haven't run the program in 6 or 7 years, but that is an estimate of what they have given us. And I will tell you that every youth court judge that I have talked with, and I'm currently serving with several of them on a commission on the status of youth courts in the state. We're looking at bringing some recommendations. Well, we have until October of this year, but we'll be bringing some recommendations to the legislature next year about the youth court system. And every youth court judge says we need community-based programs. They fully support it. They would like to see community-based. And let me give you one of the I guess harshest examples. When we release students from Oakley and send them back home, since we don't have a lot of community follow-up, they often get right back into the circumstances where they were and the kind of conduct that had, got them sentenced to Oakley in the first place. And about 3 years ago, one of the saddest one of those cases, we had a young man paroled from Oakley, went home to Yazoo City, and I think first or second weekend he was home. This was a 14, 15-year-old young man, got involved with some older teenagers, and they got into a gunfight, and he wound up the one dead on the street. If we'd had some community-based programs, I think maybe we would have had a chance at least to get him involved in some other activities and thinking some other thoughts and thinking about another path for his life. And so that's
Just one more on that.
Yes, sir.
So when we're using TANF funds,
The last year we used TANF, I don't know if I have the exact number, Mr. Chairman. I can get that for you. I'm going to say it's probably, it was around $5-6 million. And this 9 million is, taken into account, it's been 7 years since we ran any of those programs. Yes, sir. I can get that. I'll get Mr. Carpenter here to pull that number, and we'll get it back to you as soon as we can. Put in a couple of slides here, and this was actually in response to a request from the joint legislative budget committee. These are slides about what we're doing to kind of get Oakley in better shape. There's a lot of pushback we get from youth court judges that we ought to be taking more students at Oakley. And we would, but for the fact that we need the staffing. We are constantly hiring. We'll hire 6 people at Oakley and we'll lose 3 or 4. And we'll hire 6 more and we'll lose 2 or 3. And the physical plant at Oakley is just in bad shape. Y'all favored us with some ARPA money last year, about 5.1 million. And we're putting that into storm drainage work and the waste collection system repairs and heating and air conditioning repair. If there is additional ARPA funds available, I don't know what the situation is for this year, but we have a number of projects that we still need money for out at Oakley, and those are listed there. We need to replace the sewage treatment plant. We need to paint the water tower. You might say, why do you need to paint the water tower? Well, because if it rusts out, it'll fall over and we don't have any water supply. So it needs painting in order to stay functional. There's a lot of storm drainage issues out there and erosion. We got a lot of sinkholes around the campus, and that's not a safe thing to have sinkholes out there on that campus. So we have put together a request for, if there are additional ARPA funds, we could use 4.2 to 6.5 million additional ARPA funds. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like I say, I don't know how much gas is in the tank. I'm just asking. And then we put in a couple of slides here about what we're doing with ARPA funds that we were awarded directly for our child care program. We were awarded almost $200 million to increase payment rates for our child care providers, to address some workforce compensation issues and educational efforts, and to just expand child care. If you've been in rural parts of Mississippi, you know child care is hard to come by in a lot of parts of the state. And we are working with a couple of vendors right now. The discretionary spending that we receive, we are committing 80 million of that to reimbursement rate increases, but that's one-time money. It runs out at the end of September. We put almost $5 million into expanding childcare, and we have a vendor called Wonder School that's working with people who are interested in getting into the childcare business and offering training and technical assistance to them about what kind of licensing requirements you have, what kind of health and safety requirements are imposed on a child care facility, whether it's home-based or an actual facility that's dedicated to that. So we're putting about $5 million. We hope to raise up about 50 new providers. And that may not sound like a lot, but we only have about 750 providers in our whole system all across the state. So 50 new child care providers would be a significant increase if we can get new providers into the business. A lot of child care providers took school-age children during the pandemic, and they didn't really get paid for that. They couldn't get paid for it until we got this ARPA money, and the feds gave us the discretion to go back and reimburse child care providers who had school-age children in their facilities during the pandemic. And we've committed 25 million to that for school-age children. Another thing that a good idea that our child care division came up with, child care centers face the prospect of closing every day if they don't have enough teachers in place. And so we committed $3.5 million of this ARPA money to raising up a substitute teacher pool. And the last I heard, we have about 80 substitute teachers who have signed up to be a part of that pool. The way that works, if a child care center has a vacancy, has an absence, they put in a request to the substitute pool. If there's somebody in their area available, then they are sent a substitute at no cost to the child care center. I'd ask y'all to think about giving us some money. I'm not asking for it right now, but after this year runs its course, we're going to look at the effectiveness of that, and we'll probably be asking you next year to consider funding, picking that idea up on a more permanent basis. Also, we're committed to increasing the quality of the teachers and childcare. A lot of times people don't think of childcare as a teaching and a learning opportunity, but children begin learning from birth, and certainly from birth to age 5, their brain develops more than it does the rest of their lives, really. And so we are funding scholarships, about $3 million worth of scholarships for teachers to get either an AA certificate or a 12-week certificate in early childhood development. So they have a better idea about what's happening in the minds of those children that they're working with 8 hours a day. And then childcare has always been a low paid enterprise. Most of the folks working in daycare centers are making minimum wage or maybe a few dollars more. And so we committed $83.4 million of that discretionary money to paying direct monthly stipends to childcare employees. And we're paying up to $1,200 stipends to childcare workers all over the state through Horn. Horn Group is administering that program for us. So hoping again to keep people, and the requirements of that program is if you get a stipend, you make a commitment to stay in childcare for at least a year. You know, we don't want to pay these stipends and people disappear as soon as the stipend runs out. We've asked them to commit to stay in childcare for at least one additional year. Same thing for the scholarship. If you receive a scholarship, the application process makes it plain that you're committing to stay in childcare for at least an additional year beyond when you complete your degree or your certificate. So
What happens if they don't?
then we collect the money. We will be clawing back the money. Yes, sir. So the bottom line, I want to mention to you also, and I'm real nervous. I'm going to say that to you right now. I'm nervous about the fact that our capital expense money is not in our budget request. I know it's not technically part of our appropriation, but we are right at the cusp of having ITS approve our vendor for a $154 million IT modernization and upgrade that will take us from 4 batch processing systems, essentially. They're, COBOL systems that work on a batch processing. By that, I mean, we take all the information in today, it gets processed at night, and then all of the documentation related to it comes out in a big print the next day, form documents, form letters, all of that. We are transitioning to cloud-based computing and integrating 4 eligibility platforms: childcare, child support, TANF, and SNAP, none of which talk to each other. They don't communicate with each other at all. And we're merging those, integrating those into one system. Our team made a visit to Tennessee, which has just done a similar modernization project. They have taken our application process for a SNAP applicant right now runs about 2.5 to 3 hours. Tennessee is getting that accomplished in what, 20 minutes? 20 minutes. I don't have to tell you the manpower savings we would realize if all of our eligibility workers could do a SNAP application in 20 minutes versus 2.5 hours using the old systems we have.
On that point, because I know we're going to have to go into session here in a few minutes.
Yes, sir.
We gave you money for the computer system. I think you had told me previously that it was going to cost a lot more, or cost some more to get that done. What's the dollar figure?
Yeah.
The state portion.
Our team did a really good job. We did a best and final offer request, and I had originally thought it was going to be $10 or $12 million more. We're at about 5. The state portion of that is
We got it down to 5.1.
okay.
Finding other savings.
Okay, so
5.1 is the state portion, or 5.1 total.
5.1
Well,
increase.
from the 54
Yep.
that y'all have given us, we'll need about 5.5 million more.
All right.
So,
And that'll take care of the computer system. So your concern was that the capital expense funds had rolled out or special funds had rolled out of your budget. Is that what
yeah. Well, it's different from the way we've done it in the past. We always included it in our request, just that it be reappropriated.
Yeah.
I know it's been
Yeah.
appropriated.
I know. That's just normal that it roll out, but you need that reappropriated plus $5.1 million.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure we got that correct.
And if I recall,
Thank
over talking, the staff have to close out one system.
Right.
And that's part of that 2-hour process.
Oh yeah, they have to open 8 different programs just to complete one application, one SNAP application. And they close all that down and open up again to do a TANF application, for example. Yeah. And one of the things that's included in this big project, just so you know, we have a organizational change management vendor. Because a lot of our folks, this is going to be a rude awakening to them using whole new systems. And we're talking about simple things like they'll now have computers where they can use a mouse. The systems we have right now, it's all command line, function keys and hot keys and all those things. People my age, we used those in college, and we're glad to forget them when Windows came along. But we don't even have any Windows-based operations right now. So you have the bottom line there. We're asking for a general fund increase of 20 million, primarily for adolescent opportunity programs and for sorely needed staffing that we need in 82 different counties. Those are 50-50 funded staff positions, 50% of the, most of those employees, except the ones that are time limited, 50% of that is federal money, 50% is state money.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard you mention about the importance of having community-based programs.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us what they look like?
They would look like a counseling program where a child has to appear, 3 days a week and spend time with a counselor. They would look like maybe an involvement with a program at the Boys and Girls Club where there's an activity that they're involved with every day. They would look like sexual risk avoidance education where young men are taught, you don't need to start fathering children at 15 or 16 or 17. They look like a lot of, all kinds of programs designed to teach children the value of an education and finishing your education and the difference that can make in your life opportunities, even just finishing high school, the difference that can make. So everything we can expose those young men and women to let them know that the juvenile justice system is an end they don't want to, is a street they don't want to go down, and offer to them all kinds of other opportunities to make their lives something different.
Not a question, I just want to thank for AOP, whatever you call it. AOP does work, and I applaud you for working to bring it back. I know personally many successes, and I had the same conversation. And I worked real close with Jerry Broom, and unfortunately he was transitioning, but I want to applaud you for bringing it to us, and hopefully we can work to make it happen.
Thank you. I've told this youth court study commission that I'm on, whatever recommendations we have, we will have a recommendation about AOP as part of that commission's study. It's crucial, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. Thank you all so much.
And I say adolescent offender, adolescent opportunity, whatever you call it. I was offended, but
Yes, sir.
I understand.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.